Peep rotation. There's nothing more frustrating than pulling your bow back on a nice buck only to not be able to see your pins clearly because your peep is rotated. This is something that I've personally experienced in the field, and I know Chris and Rick both have as well. In order to reduce this risk, we only pick high-quality bowstrings to put on our bows. That is why this season we have partnered up with Hooked Up Bowstrings. If you are looking for a high-quality string to help get you through the season, look no further than Hooked Up. Matt, the owner, is a fantastic guy. He is an accomplished competition archer and an accomplished hunter in the woods. You can visit his website at hookedupbowstrings.com. Use the code MOBILEHUNTER10. That's MOBILEHUNTER, the number 10, in order to get 10% off your order.
Hey guys, Rick here from the Mobile Hunter Podcast, and I'm here to tell you about one of our sponsors, Saddies LLC, Custom Ammunition and Gun Works. Aaron Satterfield and his family have been turning out some awesome game loads that have been putting down deer, waterfowl, and turkey all year long. The Saddies Fatty, the turkey load that we use, can stop a bird dead in its tracks. Check them out at saddiesllc.com. That's SATTIES LLC.com, or on Facebook at Saddies LLC, and tell them the Mobile Hunter Podcast sent you.
Welcome to the Mobile Hunter Podcast. Our mission is simple. We want to help you become a better hunter. We believe that mobility kills and efficiency will set you free.
Hey guys, Jacob Sklenner with the Mobile Hunter Podcast here, coming at you a little bit late with this episode on a Thursday rather than a Wednesday. We'll call it Wild Calling Thursdays for this week, but I can assure you this is a really, really great episode. I get to sit down with my good buddy Cory Godar and talk to him about his 185 public land Kansas buck. What an absolute stud and an amazing story with a few details that he hasn't shared anywhere else. There's one particular one I can think of with a really crazy lady kind of midway through this that adds a little bit of Wild Calling Wednesday flair to it. I'm glad you guys have been reaching out, saying you've been enjoying these podcasts, and we've got some really, really good ones down the line. Just to name a few, we've got Joe Miles, and we've got the Whitetail Adrenaline guys, and several others that have recorded really, really entertaining, fun episodes with me. I look forward to being able to share those with you guys, but in the meantime, please drop a like, drop a comment, check out the videos on YouTube, or send me a PM, and tell me what you've been enjoying. Tell me what you'd like to see, or maybe a story you'd like to hear from someone. I'd love to reach out and have them on. Thanks for all the support, guys, and happy Thursday. Welcome back to another episode of Wild Calling Wednesdays. Today I've got on my friend Cory Godar, who just shot an absolute slammer in Kansas. Cory, how are you doing?
Hey, Jacob. Doing well, man. It's good to be here. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's a little bit early in the morning. It's 4:40 for me right now. I let you sleep until 5:40 because you're Eastern time zone. So, guys, if you see a little puffiness in our face and us crack a coffee or a monster or something like that, just ignore it and act like this is whatever time you're listening. But man, today we're here to talk about kind of what has happened in your season so far, with the climax being, if you want to hold him up, the absolute giant you just shot in Kansas.
This guy.
That thing is crazy.
Yeah, he's a cool deer, man.
Jeez. Wow, all the trash around the bases too. There's just not a thing about that deer that is not freaking awesome, you guys. Now I hate the metric of score, but there are people that are going to be listening to this wondering if they should go check out the YouTube version. Did you guys put a rough tape on him yet?
Yeah, we did. We had truck bed math on him at 185, and yeah. He might go anywhere from 180 to 186. I don't know. I'm not a deer scorer, but it was fun to do,
Oh yeah. It gets harder to score stuff that's got that much trash and points all over, and it becomes a little bit of interpretation at that point too, of whoever's scoring it, like what they're going to include, what they're not. And dude, that's just thoroughly a freaking magnum of a deer. And by anyone's standard, man, that is just an absolute stud.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it was awesome to shoot. We went out there to shoot a good deer. Did not expect that, but once we saw him, it was kind of the decision was made that we got to go all in and try to make this happen, and fortunately it did. So hopefully it's a story I can live to tell my grandkids one day.
Yeah. And just want to go on the record here and say that you, me, and Jake and Cody Schleich are in a group chat. And my buddy, like 3 days earlier than when you shot your deer, his younger sister shot what's probably like a mid to upper 60s during youth season on public in Kansas. And I sent a picture in the group chat of that deer, and I said, no pressure, but this is my buddy's younger sister with her youth season public land buck, so that's the standard you got to beat, Cory. And you responded, Jacob, I'll never touch that, LOL, holy crap, what a stud. And I responded to that, I'm sure you will. And then you shot that deer the next day, and I messaged, read that freaking message again, Cory. Congratulations on an absolute giant.
Yeah,
which is hilarious.
You spoke that one into existence, and
you
did the work.
I was like, you did the work, man. I mean, you were doing, like so many people when they go out of state and get a deer like this, particularly a state that maybe they haven't, gone on a full out scouting trip on or something like that, right? They just think like, man, I lucked out so much. Like, it could have been a 140 on the other end and I would have shot it too. And honestly, it's like, people say success is where preparation meets opportunity. And so you've put in the work, you put yourself in a position to succeed, and you guys spent 2 days, I mean, I don't want to dive too much in, but 2 days before opener scouting, and it just seems like those guys that get out there and grind and put themselves in the right situations are due for one of these occurrences, for sure. And messaging that, really, when I thought about, saying you're due for that, like that's a standard. And you replied like, I'll never touch that. It really made me think like, how do I respond to that? Like, do I just say, yeah, haha, LOL. But I was like, you know what? Like, why can't it happen? Like, why can't, I just talked to Chancey Walters, like, why can't the 220 walk out in front of you or just the legends that are out there, And honestly, I was like, man, if I were to put money down on like whether Cory was going to shoot a big one or not, like a 170 plus, I would have a really hard time like saying that you could go a long stretch in Kansas without that happening. If I put a bet that you weren't going to shoot one, I would have been pretty terrified for my money for that period of time. So, and I was like, you know what? Like, why can't this happen? And so you made it happen, and I'm very glad that I could have some record that I was like one of the people of faith beforehand. But dude, 100% deserving of that deer and much more. If you guys haven't had the pleasure of meeting Cory at a show, I'll embarrass him right now and advocate for him a little bit. Cory's a great dude, just a straight up shake your hand, have a conversation kind of guy. And that is in and out of shows, in messages, off messages. Like he's a good dude. And that's kind of like the only people I really want to have on this podcast is people that I would in fact crack a beer with, because that's the theme of this thing. But dude, you absolutely deserve every bit of what you had, and I wouldn't be surprised if your season continues to roll this way going forward.
Well, hey, Jacob, those were kind words, man. I really appreciate that, and I hope you know that I and a lot of other people think the same of you. And
well, thank you.
It's a lot of fun to try to surround yourself with the people that are as passionate about the same thing that you are and want to put the same amount of work into it that you do. And unfortunately, we play a game that the more hard work you put into it, obviously the luckier you'll get. But sometimes, even if you do everything right, it still doesn't always go your way. And I think that's what makes it. I think that's what keeps us coming back, But fortunately, this one did, and I think it's gonna be a fun story to tell. So
yeah. You're reminding me about a study I just read about curiosity and trying to satisfy it, and the concept of failure bringing you back. But I think we can rope that in somewhere along the way in this story, and I just want to dive into it. So your season starts off and you guys are in Nebraska. So kind of take me through, well, I guess let's go before that. Take me through what happened in your off season, the issues you had with your shoulder, maybe even before then as well.
Yeah. So pretty typical. Played a decent amount of sports growing up, and at some point suffered a pretty good labrum tear in my left shoulder. Labrum's the cartilage that holds your shoulder in the socket. And so I had just a pretty gnarly slap tear, and a slap tear is a superior labrum anterior to posterior tear, from the top to the back of your shoulder. And it ended up tearing my bicep tendon up top as well. And basically what they did is they go in, they put six anchors in my labrum, and then they severed my bicep tendon and reattached that in my arm. And it's a pretty common surgery, for people in their 40s to 50s. And, at the time I was 30. So it's, it sucked. I kind of had to deal with that. Got a lot lighter poundage bow, I was shooting 50 pounds and, got that together, but I got the bow hunt, got back from it, which was always expected. And, just kind of did everything to stick to the rehab plan, build my strength back up. And I knew I was going to be all right. And so that happened, 3 months before last bow season. Went into bow season, got my butt kicked, and I actually ended up missing a decent amount of deer. I missed a buck during the year. And then my last hunt of the season, I went out to shoot a doe just to kind of get some confidence, shoot a deer before the year was over, and had my opportunity. And I shot basically a foot low of this thing as it came down. And so when that happened, I had been having a lot of issues with my eyes trying to see my pins, and I was shooting a multi-pin sight. I'd go to full draw. I'd have my green top pin, but instead of seeing a 5-pin, I was seeing a 10-pin, and it was double vision. And so I literally would be at full draw, doe would come in, I'd look and I'd draw my bow back, and I'd be playing a game. Is the top green pin the real pin, or is the second green pin the real pin? And it obviously at full draw, low light situation on an animal. It's borderline unethical to be doing that. And, season ended, went and got my eyes checked out, went to a couple regular eye doctors. They tried to get me contacts for astigmatism, all that stuff, and they couldn't figure it out. So finally I went to a true optometrist, and they, did some scans of my eyes and found out I have basically a cornea disease in my right eye that's caused my cornea to kind of deteriorate in this shape. And, it sounds crazy, but it's really not that big of a deal. It's just basically causes pretty good double vision for nearsightedness in my eye, and it's non-correctable by contacts or glasses. So my options kind of were get cornea surgery, which they literally take a cadaver cornea from a dead body. They sew it into your eye to correct the shape, and that sounded awful. So I just kind of went home, made my decisions that, maybe my best route was to just change hands. And so my surgery shoulder was actually getting to a point that it was significantly stronger probably than my good shoulder, just because I had been rehabbing it so much. And, back to the gym, doing pull-ups, push-ups, it felt fine. And so I just kind of made the jump. This was about 3 months ago at this point, and got a left-handed bow, built a bow out in my basement, and just started doing everything I could to build that left-handed muscle memory, and, shooting over and over, and eventually, picked it up. And to be honest, I think I probably now shoot a bow significantly better left-handed than I did right-handed, just simply for the fact that I can see, and the target is clear. And once I got the muscle memory built up and the stability in the bow, and was able to get a smooth draw cycle, it really wasn't too bad. So, I kind of had that finalized probably a good 2.5 weeks before we went to Nebraska.
Wow. That's even more than I remembered with that too, with the deteriorating cornea. That's tough, man. I'd be pretty scared to have a random person's cornea in my eye as well.
Yeah, I don't know about that. So I think I'm just going to stick to the left-handed thing for now. And but yeah, man, I've talked about this before, and to be honest, it sounds worse on paper, but in reality, those issues are really not that big of a deal. You know, at the end of the day, I still get to go bow hunt, and all I had to do is switch the hand I'm doing it with. So it's made for a few hiccups. You know, the first time I set a tree this year, I actually forgot I'm supposed to set up on the left-handed side of the tree now compared to the right-handed side of the tree. And so there was a few things there, but once I got it down, it's honestly provided a few advantages. There's times that being on the other side of the tree has actually really worked out for me. So it's interesting.
That's sweet too. And I bet a lot of the guys you hunt with are righty too. So if you guys ever get in a situation where one person's going to cover one area and you the other, it's probably much more fitting in those scenarios.
Right. Yeah.
It's cool, man. That is, you're very casual about your perseverance. And I think that it's a good lesson to take, that we can't really affect the situations we're in. We can only really affect how we respond to them. And it seems like you took what you were given and you decided your best route and you didn't look back. And I can't stress that to people enough, that when you come to a hard road between two decisions and you just keep your head up and you keep pushing on, you may choose the wrong one, but you're going to make it the best it could possibly be. So I feel like going into the complete wrong decision with an open heart and mind is probably just as good as going to the best situation possible with a semi-closed mind. So just keep trucking forward. If you're listening to this and you're persevering through some stuff, it's always what my coaches call a great opportunity to get tough.
I love that.
And it looks like you got tough, Cory. And I really like that about you.
I appreciate that, man.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm good with my right hand at stuff, like decent. Can't do crap with my left hand. I'm like the least ambidextrous person I've ever known. You try to get me to throw a baseball with my left hand, it looks like I've never seen one in my life. So huge respect to that. Man, so you're rolling into this season, you're 2.5 weeks out, and you feel adequate with your left-handed shooting. That's hard to do when you're doing as much work as you guys are doing at Latitude right now, especially you with all the marketing and stuff like that. That it's a lot of work. It's a lot of your off season. So I commemorate you for getting out ahead of it. You know, a lot of guys listen to this are like, well, I'm ready to shoot 3 months before this season. Yeah, it was like, one, you're not switching hands probably every year, but two, there's a lot of stuff that it makes it easy to reprioritize other things over practicing. And you getting ready 2.5 weeks beforehand really shows that, you know, you wanted to be super solid by the time you got to there. And obviously you're practicing before that and then got more reps into before the season. So, I mean, you took care of what you needed to. And rolling into Nebraska here, you guys headed out, I believe, a week later than I did, correct?
Correct. Yeah, we ended up missing the opener, and that was for a few reasons. Alex and I both had some weddings early. We went out there with Alex Chop from Latitude, and the other side of it was we had a lot of product launch this year, and we just kind of got a little overwhelmed with that and had to get that out the door. And so it pushed us off to the second week. And, honestly, not much is too terribly different from the second week to the first week. Obviously there's a few things going on in the deer woods, and a lot of them are beginning to shed velvet and all that. So there's a little bit of change. But weather-wise, it was still, anywhere from 91 to 93 degrees hot, and the egg was still all uncut for the most part. And pressure wasn't terrible. We ran into some pieces you could tell that had been hunted for the opener, and a lot of boot tracks and stuff like that. But all in all, we kind of approached it similar to how we would have approached, an opener hunt.
Yeah, that makes sense. Were you guys mostly in open country? Kind of like describe the country. Obviously, don't go give us coordinates or tell us maybe the region you're in Nebraska, but kind of describe what terrain you're looking at when you're going in the season.
Yeah, the majority of everything we were hunting was ag. We had beans and corn. And so pretty much for the most part, the majority of the properties broke down with some mix of that. We had been there 2 years ago, and there was a lot of milo, otherwise known as sorghum, and that was not there this year. And a few things we learned about that. We talked to the farmers, and it seems to be something that's dictated by the farming market, and just was not in need this year, so it didn't get planted. And that did change things. So where there was sorghum a few years ago when we were there was now pretty much either just corn or beans. The sorghum seems, out west from my experience with it, to hold a lot of deer, and we got on deer on the sorghum previously. So a lot of the spots that we thought were good in holding deer were totally different this time around. And so, it was kind of back to square one type of feeling. But, for the most part, you got your woodline draws, occasional creeks, and, there is topography there. Like we would find, in the corn, you'd get a little bit of elevation drop and some points here and there. But for the most part, just kind of flatland egg country.
Yeah. So are you guys mostly sitting back and glassing, at least in the beginning, and then pursuing in Nebraska? What's kind of your strategy going into that situation?
So glassing was definitely on the radar. We spent a lot of time driving around, and especially in the mornings, and trying to get eyes on deer, but realized quickly we were not having any luck with that. The issue kind of seemed to be that the beans out there seem to be a lot taller than the beans where I'm from in Ohio, and so to see deer, it was tough. They would have had to be standing up. And at the same time, the pieces that we were hunting were rather small. And a lot of times the parking areas, those slight topography changes, you wouldn't always be able to see the majority of the area you wanted to hunt. Some of these had some secluded corners, secluded bean fields, stuff like that. So we did try to glass, but it quickly kind of turned into we realized we're going to have to just start checking these things off with boots on the ground one by one.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a tall task when you come into a new area. Pretty much a new area. You change all the variables, deer are going to act differently, but bouncing around to properties and trying to scout your way in and not bust the whole thing up. Sometimes you get to the end of the property when your winds hit everything and you're like, oh, this is the spot, but it's too late. Then you're copy and paste that maybe into another scenario to try and get further on them. But yeah, that's a tough game, man. So break down a little bit of like any major events that maybe happened in Nebraska. Like I know that you ended up shooting a doe, but kind of break down your mentality going through that season, what you saw, and then what resulted in you end up shooting a doe.
Yeah. So my goal going out there was basically we weren't going to hunt until we found that we were on the X. And I've been out of state before. I've been to Nebraska before, and the last time I did that, we got there a few days before opener. We did our scouting, and then I kind of fell into this trap of it's now opening day. I should be hunting, and we had found a decent amount of sign at the time and threw some decent hunts, but this time around, I did not want to get in a tree until I felt extremely confident I was going to shoot something. And so the approach really was, as another piece to that, we didn't feel the pressure to be in the tree any certain day because it was already hunting season. And, there was no hard deadline of, hey, it's opening day, it's time to hunt. So, I had map scouted and picked out a decent amount of pieces, and the plan was just to check them all off. And so we just started walking. We got there Saturday night, was able to check off a few before dark. And then the next 2 days, we were just waking up before daylight, and we'd drive around, glass as much as we can at daybreak, and then start walking. And so we did that for 2 days. Lane Hausner came out there with me, and Lane, he was being a videographer, but he's also a very good hunter. And so that was great to have. As Lane kind of almost worked like a caddy to me as a golfer, so I'm
That's
sitting there
cool.
able to just bounce ideas off him the whole time as we're going. And Lane's also not afraid to work hard. So we pounded ground, man. We ended up walking 21 pieces of public. before we started hunting. And what we found was a lot of them were not holding much sign. And, this time of year, the ground is so dry out there that tracks can be hard to judge. It almost looks like everything looks like chalk. It's you can see a track, but it's kind of sometimes hard to make out any details about it. And it's often kind of deteriorated and hard to tell if it's fresh or not. And we would find them, in creek crossings and areas that held any kind of water. But a lot of the pieces we were realizing quickly they weren't giving that warm and fuzzy of, hey, like, you got to spend some time here. We found one off the rip, hung a camera on it, and ended up having a guy with a high-powered rifle there the next morning, definitely poaching of some kind. And fast forward, we just kept going. And fortunately, we did come across the piece eventually that we wanted to hunt. And the sign that, gave us that feeling came down the edge of the beans, and there was a bunch of sapling rubs. And, this time of year, obviously, if you're finding rubs, it's probably because they're rubbing their velvet off or just got out of velvet. And told us that it was recent. He's probably been here in the last few days. And we kind of continued down that bean line and found our first scrape of the week, just a nice field edge scrape that had been opened up. And as we continued to walk, there ended up being a scrape line from about halfway down that bean field all the way to the end and wrapped around the corner all the way around the back. And, to me, that when I see that and think about that, being that it's the first scrapes of the year that we'd seen open up, it's probably a deer with enough mental capacity that's kind of understood what a scrape has been before and knew to lay them down there. And tells me he's probably been through a few seasons. It's probably at least like a 3-year-old at minimum. And to that, we just kind of knew this was kind of our time and our opportunity. So that's where we hunted. And, it's going to sound, I guess, a little hypocritical, but, we found hot sign and you think it's time to dive in on it. And I think it's my number one mistake or regret looking back on Nebraska, but we immediately that afternoon went and dove into the biggest scrape, the hottest scrape we found on that piece all the way in the back corner. And that I think the Ohio hunter in me, the higher pressure, less amount of public land guy, was very fearful that, if I don't hunt it tonight, someone else is going to be in there hunting it. And I didn't necessarily read that situation right. We definitely were on a piece that I don't think anybody's probably touched this year. It was smaller, probably very much so overlooked. When I first saw it on a map, my comment to Lane was, Lane, we're going to check this one, but it's probably my least favorite piece that we're going to look at today. And so, it panned out, but we went in, we sat it, had some does come out. It was a great hunt, honestly. Saw a good amount of deer, but we didn't see the buck. And we get down, but the way we had put ourselves in there, we were all the way in the back, and now it's dark and we have to come out and walk past that scrape line. And sure enough, we're coming out, and standing on the first scrape is the buck. And we blow him into the next county, and our opportunity that was very scarce and hard to find, we had just blown. And we get out, we hunted that the next 2 days, and just didn't see him. I think we did a little bit of damage there. And quick lesson learned is, for us, was we probably should have been a little bit more patient.
Yeah, and I think that the mentality too that follows in more pressured areas would be to go back to that primary giant scrape in the back, just because even if no one else is hunting it, right? Like, you've been in there, you've scouted it. Obviously, you've gotten close enough, if you've seen it, that if a deer went to hit it and he left it and traveled somewhere else, he'd probably cross your ground scent. Now, I'm assuming that you've seen this in lower pressure areas as well, but the experience I had in Nebraska was that if you didn't bump that deer directly, even if it caught your ground scent, there's a decent chance that it showed back up, not maybe in the same area, but within a mile of it, within the property of it, especially if, I'm in open terrain. If you're in an ag source with a little more localized timber, he's probably going to show up pretty dang close to there, maybe on that scrape line, even if he smelled your ground scent the day before. But if you bust him, I'm assuming that's where the real damage was done for you guys.
It was for sure. And I was looking at that the same way, that, this is egg fields, we can't be the first person to walk the edge of them. That's kind of essentially all we were doing for scouting, is just following the egg line and the tree line. And, the way this property set up, you had beans on the public, you had corn on the private that bordered it, you had a tree line in between. But in that cornfield was multiple draws that were unplanted. And looking back on it, it was the perfect buck bedding. You had this unplanted thick draw in between the corn that fed down into the tree line and into the beans. And, my brain kept going to this back corner, because in the back corner, you had more of a secluded bean field there. And you had basically a creek, so to speak, that wasn't necessarily holding a lot of water, but also, then another private cornfield. And there's just a lot of diversity going on down in that corner. And, looking back, and what we should have done and what we probably could have done to kill that deer is gone and sat downwind on the other side of the bean field and just watch for at least one night to see exactly where these deer are coming out. It wasn't like we found one scrape. We found like 10 scrapes. They're all this field edge scrape line. And so it wasn't necessarily that situation of, hey, that's the scrape outside of his bed, and, that's the one you got to hunt. We were just picking the best field edge scrape of 10 field edge scrapes. And, so, live and learn, but, the patient card was ringing in the back of my head here, that like, hey, dummy, like, yes, it's public land, but you got to be aware of the situation that, you haven't seen anybody else over here, and take your time and make your sits count. So, that's kind of what we took in. And, the reality though was we blew that situation up. That deer was not coming back. We sat it for the next day and a half and had no, he might be back there now. But for the time period, the window we had, we felt we had exhausted all our options. We had scouted the majority of the properties within driving distance of our place. And, this is part of the story that I thought was extremely interesting. We haven't talked about, but, where our heads went was, well, maybe we need to try to get some permission, around, the place, and see if we can, expand our odds that way. We've exhausted the public. And, there was a farmer whose house we were staying at. Like, this wasn't a true rental. This is just a farmer that Alex had met through his years in Nebraska, and we're staying in one of his extra farm homes. And quite literally, and this is no joke, one day, midday, we're eating lunch, and a lady literally comes into the home, barges in, and starts telling us she was on mushrooms and had got her car impounded and needed us to call someone to get her picked up.
Oh my God.
And so we were sitting in the kitchen. This lady barges into the kitchen, sits down at the kitchen table, and starts just rambling this all to us. So I call the person she's talking about for her, get her a ride, and she's essentially just stuck with us until this person arrives. And
oh my God.
She is out of her mind high, and asking us every question under the sun, why we have all this camera gear, what we're doing with all this hunting stuff. And it was just something out of a movie. But the question, what kind of ended up occurring is she goes, well, why don't you hunt on my property?
Oh my God, dude. You guys I can't believe this, because you didn't preface me for this at all. So a lady on shrooms barges into your house and offers you permission.
Yeah, literally.
Wow. That's about the only way I feel like I'd get permission.
Yeah. It felt like a sign, Jacob. So we continue this conversation, and basically what happened is I didn't trust that she actually owned this land. It was as crazy as it sounds. The lady on mushrooms barges in on us and offered us 100 acres to hunt. And so the first thing I did is the guy that she had asked me to call to pick her up. I'm talking to him on the phone. I'm like, hey, this, she's telling me she owns this land and she's got 100 acres, and I'm struggling to believe it because she's here high on mushrooms, just got her car impounded. And the guy on the phone actually ended up confirming it. And,
wow.
So he gets there. I kind of have this conversation with him, and sure enough, she owned 100 acres. And so, that night we go down there to scout it. She was there, went back to her house, and her boyfriend was there, and we go down and they got this pit bull tied up, and I'm walking around this pit bull scouting this essentially crackhead's private land. And honestly, the sign we were hoping for just wasn't there, but it kicked our butts. And we're walking 100 acres and 95 degrees, speed scouting it, trying to get through it. And we get up to the top, and I remember we went back to the house for a minute. We realized we weren't going to hunt it. It just was, the sign was as dry as it gets, but it was a beautiful rut funnel, just a unplanted field with a beautiful draw down the middle of it, big tree line creek in between all the private ag surrounding it. And it was just a crazy experience. But we get back to the house, and I'm sitting there talking to D-Rock, and where we landed was like, hey, we have burnt the public to the ground. We blew our opportunity on a buck. We just ended up on a crackhead's private land. We scouted that. We didn't have any luck. We talked to multiple farmers. And in the back of my head, I'm coming back to like, hey, we got to leave for Kansas in 2 days. I haven't shot a deer in a year and a half. I'm shooting a left-handed bow, and I need to get some deer under my belt. And I'm sitting there thinking of something my uncle had told me multiple times when I was growing up and getting into hunting with him. And, he was always an advocate of shooting does early because, he's like, get the deer under your belt, for your opportunity on a bigger deer. You're going to be a lot more composed. You're going to have that confident feeling. And so D-Rock had actually told me about a spot him and Alex had blown some does out a few nights ago. And Lane and I went in there and, made that decision to shoot a doe. And we had a hell of a hunt, man. We're setting up on a super sketchy tree, no platforms, just standing on limbs. And, one of those hunts that, it was just beautiful, but you feel like something's going to happen because you're in some funky, wonky situation. And
right.
Sure enough, we had a doe come out, had a small buck pitch out, walk 3 yards in front of us right down the corn line. And, half hour goes by, and real good mature doe jumps the fence right in front of us, comes broadside at 20 yards, and we smoked her. And, you would have thought we just shot 150-inch deer and shooting, hollering. She goes down in the field edge, and D-Rock and Joey P come out, and we get her cleaned up and taken care of. And it was just an awesome night. Our last night in Nebraska there, we got to hang out, have a few beers at the farmhouse, watch the sun go down, and it was awesome, man.
Dude, that is great. That's such a rich experience to do it with so many of your good friends around you too, and people that have been grinding with you on this hunt. I mean, I have to say I'm really glad the lady didn't have crazy bucks at her house or something like that, because the Lane probably would have had to marry her. And, that's a tough situation when you're coming back married to a chick, from Nebraska. I've only been in it twice, but it's never turns out well, it seems like.
Right. I've been telling Joey Pavlovich that for years, that, Joey's a younger guy. He's 22, I believe. And I keep telling him he needs to play the long-term game out there. If he finds the right farmer's daughter and starts dating her now, eventually he could own that farm. We all could be hunting in about 30 years. And he seems to be open to it, but nah, we're probably going to take a few more trips to get it being out there for that to happen. So,
yeah, I had this is a goofy story, but I had a girl one time at a bar hit on me, and I did not want anything to do with it. And she tried to bribe me by saying that her dad had 400 acres in Iowa. And And that was the only, I perked my ears for a second. I was like, nope, can't do it. Like, it was, it was a unique experience. My friends next to me were like, dude, like, can I talk to her?
That was your opportunity, brother. That was your opportunity.
No, dude, I have the girl of my dreams right now, so I'm gonna keep it completely there, man.
You're a good man.
No hunting land is worth what she puts up with. For instance, she's sleeping in the room right next to me. We have paper thin walls, and I'm recording a podcast at 4:30 in the morning, and in our closet that is filled with mounts. So she allows a lot. She's very kind. But moving on from that, man, you guys just rode this high from Nebraska, smoked this doe, had an awesome experience as guys, and now you're ready to rock on a buck. So what's the mentality and the morale like going into Kansas? You guys are heading out 2 days early for the Kansas season, I believe.
Hey guys, Rick here from the Mobile Hunter Podcast, and I'm here to tell you about one of our sponsors, Sadie's LLC, Custom Ammunition and Gun Works. Aaron Satterfield and his family have been turning out some awesome game loads that have been putting down deer, waterfowl, and turkey all year long. The Sadie's Fatty, the turkey load that we use, can stop a bird dead in its tracks. Check them out at saddiesllc.com. That's SATTIES LLC.com, or on Facebook at Saddies LLC, and tell them the Mobile Hunter Podcast sent you.
2 days early for the Kansas season, I believe.
Yep. So we're driving down to Kansas on Friday, and Kansas season open on Monday. And if you've never hunted Kansas before, the early season, they start mid-month in September. But it is not only archery, they have a early season muzzleloader hunt. And so it is muzzleloader. You do have to wear orange. And, basically the mentality was the same. It was scout until we find deer. And the other side of that coin was we had just hit it pretty hard. We were a whole week into this of sun up to sundown, grinding. The only morning we even got any sleep was after we shot the doe. And the other side of that was like, we realized opportunities were going to be hard to come by. It's early season. The deer are hard to find. It doesn't matter whether you're in Kansas or Nebraska. It was, we realized if we had a situation, we were going to have to capitalize. So we looked for that. We got down there Friday night, did some glassing, did not see anything. We spent the night in the truck driving around. Same story, looking at ag, and never saw a deer. I think we ended up seeing one doe right at dark coming out of a private cedar thicket. And so we kind of were quickly, I don't want to say second guessing the ag, but kind of trying to think of other options. And, the next day was Saturday. We get up and same story, drove around at dawn, and we drove around some pieces to the south of us and saw a decent amount of deer. And then we went to the north and scouted, and we ended up just pounding ground that day. And we did find a good piece of land, and it was traditional ag land, but it had a lot bigger wood lot. And on this land, there's basically two bean fields that were split and ran into a cornfield, but they were secluded and unable to be seen from the road. And in order to get down to these, you would have had to walk a decent amount. And we did that. And we bumped a bunch of does off the creek bed. And we found a ton of browse in these beans. I mean, when you look at beans, it becomes very obvious the ones that are being hit very hard and the ones that are just being nicked. And on that secluded bean field was a nice field edge scrape. And, we felt ready to hunt this piece. I mean, there was a good amount of tracks, creek crossing, and what I didn't want to happen though is the same thing in Nebraska, that we end up with one spot that we're putting our time into. Maybe we blow it out, maybe we don't. But it was also Saturday, and we still had Sunday to scout before the Monday opener. So we just kept on keeping on and scouted a lot more that night. But that next morning, Sunday morning, we got up to glass, and we went to a piece that Jake Bush and Derek had hunted the year before. That was several thousand acres, and they hunted it in the rut. And in the back of my head, I'm like, well, there's no ag here. to be honest, it just looks like barren wasteland, cow land. And I'm trying to like reason with myself as to why leave the spot, why not look to replicate the stuff we just found the sign in. But what I liked about this larger piece was we could glass it. And so, we got up at 4 a.m. I think Lane thought I was crazy for wanting to go here because we had just found such good stuff, in the other type of terrain. And we get up and make the 1.5 mile walk to the glassing point, sit there for sunup, and we don't see anything for a while. About 7:30, 7:45 rolls around, and Lane's like, "Hey, there's a deer," and we look down, and to give you perspective of how far we were from this thing, we literally thought it was a doe at first, and we're watching
with
it
a Christmas tree on his head.
right. And so we get the spotting scope up, and he makes a scrape on basically what was just a grass pasture, with a wood line on the backside of it. And we watch him make this scrape, realize quickly it's a buck, and we're glassing with the binos, but we both only have 10x42 binos, a spotting scope with no bone scope to really work with it. And he comes down this tree line. He basically is in, essentially how this property lays out is if you really dumbed it down, it's a hub. And so you got barren cow wasteland all up top, and this cow pasture would dive into ravines and form drainage systems. And so you'd have your drainages, your micro hubs that dumped into this bigger bottom that was the macro hub that had some cow pasture in the bottom. So you had some green grass fields, tons of browse. You did have wood lines, a little bit of water, and honestly down there was quite a few oaks. And so once we saw this, once we got sun up, and my belly felt a lot better about it, that, hey, yeah, we're off the egg, but that, to be quite honest, the more I'm learning about these bigger deer, that really doesn't mean much at all. And in a lot of scenarios, it can be a lot better to be away from it. And so, we watched this kind of all play out. And what was going on is we had south winds all week, real hot days. Weather wasn't changing much. Pressure was pretty stagnant in that higher 29s. And the south winds were just blowing through this drainage. And we watched this buck go all the way to the north side of it, hook across the entire pasture, come back towards us into that south wind, onto our side of the drainage, and work up into a thicket and go to bed on a south-facing slope, which was the windward hill there. And on this south-facing slope, if you just picture just cow pasture grass, and at the bottom of it, you get into the thicker, taller browse and the tree line and the pasture. But on that hill was basically a draw, and there was 2 patches of timber. You had a small patch at the bottom that was maybe 30 yards wide and 50 yards long. And then you had a break where you could basically drive a truck through. And then another patch of this timber that was about the same size. And above that that higher patch of timber was one lone tree, and provided a pretty good canopy up there. And we weren't exactly sure what part of that he was going into. Where we were glassing, we lost him in the bottom half. But we watched him go in there. That was the end of our morning, and went back to the house and just kind of regrouped, and did a little bit more scouting midday that day, and talked with Alex, and he kept, and this was kind of our plan anyways, but he kept saying, he's like, man, you found one, I wouldn't leave it. And
right.
So sure enough, that afternoon we go back out to glass him, and we sit on the same point and watch him at 7:30 come out of that bed, and he gets up, walks down the hill, and he at that break in between the 2 patches of timber, he goes left and basically walks right through this open field and drops down into the pasture, and we lose him in the tree line. And we're jacked up at this point, but it is still the day before season. And the next morning is opening day, and in the back of my head, I'm just trying to process what we saw. And I have 2 thoughts. A is you just learned you needed to be patient in Nebraska. You need to slow down, make these sits count. Let's not go blow this up.
Yeah.
the other side of me is, well, what if some gun hunter rolls in here and just sits right up on one of these knobs above his bed and smokes him? And the other thing was, we just saw his J-hook. We watched him J-hook into his bed, and I'm sitting there thinking, well, man, wouldn't it be nice to get in way early in the morning, go to the north side of this drainage, put that south wind in your face, sit right on his J-hook and shoot him opening morning. And I'm thinking about that. I'm talking to a lot of people. I'm talking to Alex every night, running everything by Lane. We're just theorizing on all this stuff, talking to DJ Riley, talking to Jake Bush, and getting as many people's opinion as I could. And finally, the decision was made. We were just going to glass again in the morning and skip opening morning and not force the situation. And so we go out, make the 1.5 mile walk back out before daybreak. And this time I went to a glassing knob that was essentially like right over his bedding area. And Lane stayed back on the one we were on. And so we could see everything. And I'm sitting there just burning the glass up, waiting for him all morning. We never saw him. He just didn't show. And, I was confused by that. We just saw him an hour past daybreak, the day before. And so in my head, I'm like, man, like, even if he changed his pattern, did he change it that drastically? Did he get back to bed before daylight? Did I just missed him or what? And so we go back, we have lunch, and the one thing about opening day was we had a slight temp drop. It was not a massive temp drop, but it was about 5 degrees, and we hadn't had that all week. And we had a pressure drop, and Alex was like, hey man, like, it's a good night to be in a tree. It's opening day. You got a little temp drop. It's gonna be hard to skip this. And so my rationing was, we didn't see him go to bed on the right half of this property. Well, maybe he's on the left half of the property, and I should try to figure out how to see him down there. And so I talked to Lane, and I asked Lane, are you cool if I just self-film and you stay up top in this glassing point and watch and make sure we don't miss something here? And so I'd go in and self-film and go down to the far left of the property to basically see the other side. And that was a brutal 2 mile walk, but it was a very rewarding walk because it was the first time I got my boots on the ground down in the bottom and got to see what was going on here. And there was a good amount of sign. There was a lot of tracks. There was chinkapin oaks that were just destroyed, and very obvious. To be honest, I think they probably had been burned up by this point. But man, they had been hammering them. I mean, every oak on that tree was 8, and the ground was just, it looked like just a pitcher's mound of just dirt. And so I throw that sit, don't see anything on the complete other end, and make the walk back out to the truck and meet Lane at the truck. And sure enough, he saw him come out of that same bed.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yep. So he glassed him. And what happened was, though, is he must have been getting back to bed before daylight, or he's taking some route that we were missing him. And this time he came out of that bed, and at that break in between the two patches of timber, he went right. And so the night before he had gone left. And, obviously that wasn't exactly productive for making a decision on where to hunt him. So again, the next morning we decided not to hunt because I just still felt like we didn't have enough information to strike. And so we get up, drive out there, hour plus drive, 1.5 mile walk to the glassing point, sit there in glass, and we don't see him again. And so back to the house we go, and it's early, and me and Lane are just tossing ideas back and forth. And finally it was just like, we're gonna hunt him, and we're gonna assume he's in that bed. We missed him, or he's getting back to bed before daybreak, and we just can't see him. But we didn't want to watch him 3 nights in a row come out of the same bed and not take a chance. And so the way this set up is, we were coming in from the east, and he was bedded to the north of us on a south wind on our side, the east side of the drainage in this draw. So we had to get past him, get onto the west side of the drainage, and then go north to get around him and come back into him the same way he J-hooked into that bed to put the wind in our face and avoid our thermals and everything, just sucking right up the hill to him. And, that ended up being about a 2.5 mile loop from the truck, and it's 90 plus degrees in Kansas right now. So that was the plan. We started at noon, and we got there. We went to the gas station early, picked up, some waters and Gatorades, and started making the trek in. And basically what we knew is either A, we were going to see him, or B, we were going to blow this place up, because the route we had designed, we had to walk the whole other tree line that we had watched him walk. We had to come across the field where we watched him go across the field. And then we were going to try to crawl basically right up into his bedding area where he's been walking every night. And we didn't bring sticks, saddles, or platforms. We just were going to ground hunt. And the reason for that is, I had been sitting on the glassing knob above his bedding area for 2 days and was able to kind of really take a lot of time to think about, if we were in a tree, what tree would we be in? And the reality was, the only trees I think we could have got in would have blown the whole hunt up. They were on basically the east side of his bedding area, where, all of our wind and thermals would have been going right up to him the whole afternoon before he came down. And we wanted to be on the west side of where he came down. And
yeah, it seems like in those situations, especially when you've been glassing a deer beforehand and you get to see the lack of options, really, it seems like you're starting to hunt more for a tree again. Like, the advantage of your setup with Latitude sticks and saddle and everything is you can get in pretty much any tree. But now when you're in an area that's lacking so many trees, you're back to hunting for a tree again, the same way you would if you were just using a climber maybe elsewhere. And I think that you stand to not only make a lot more sound and have a better visual presence, like more obvious visual presence if you're in a stand, but you also can't adjust to anything he's doing. And in my mind, him going left and then right, like you might have to adjust to that in a future situation here. So, I mean, I'd rather be on the ground to adjust to the variables at hand. It sounds like you guys made the right decision.
100%. And we're kind of in that same thought process of, we don't know. He's going to come down that hill and he's going to go one way or the other. And, how it kind of plays out is, we did have to make a play, and, we can get into that, but it was the right call at the end of the day to not be in a tree. And, kind of how it worked out is, we got there early and we just took our time and made this big loop. And so we walk across the drainage, we get on the west side, and this is cattle pasture. There's cattle everywhere. And so we're following a cattle trail up the tree line, and it honestly was not too terrible of a walk because of that. We're not bushwhacking by any means. And we get down in this creek drainage on the far side, and just are getting destroyed by gnats, and to the point it was borderline unbearable. And we're waving our orange hats around trying to smack these things and get them out of our eyes. And we take a few more steps forward and end up bumping a whole doe group right out of this drainage. And we're at this point, we're 300 to 400 yards from his bed. But we are standing right behind the scrape that we watched him make that 2 mornings ago. And now all the pieces are coming together. Like this scrape, he obviously was in this wood line because the does are in this wood line bedding here. He put the scrape in front of the doe bedding where he could see it. And the does blow, and we sit there and they run off, and we're just praying like that he didn't hear that. And part of the idea of getting in there so early that midday was the winds were screaming and howling, and we knew we were going to get away with a lot more being there early. Hopefully he's sleeping, he's in bed, the winds are howling, covering our noise. And I remember when the does the does blew, I honestly, my gut felt a lot better about the situation. I felt that he was there. We still don't know he's there. We didn't see him in the morning, but I'm looking back, I'm sitting there thinking, like, if the does are here, he's been here the last 2 days, why would he not be there? And we got the same wind, relatively same temps. And anyways, we kind of hunkered down behind his scrape. And we're sitting there just glassing and taking a break because we blew these deer out. And what I was glassing is a route to get across the field. We could have taken the tree line up a little further, but it would have required us basically going down a farm road. And that farm road was exposed to his bed. And so we picked a direct path across the pasture and put the tallest trees we could as a visual block between us and him. And we just sat there, waited for the wind to pick up. As the wind started to scream, we just scurried across the field. And, big risk. He's probably sitting up there laughing at us in these bright orange vests running across the field at him. And, but it worked. And, we got to this farm road and we kind of hunkered down, and on his side of the farm road was basically this, kind of chest high switchgrass. And that was very beneficial to us because we were able to basically just lay down and hunker down to it. And we take a break, throw in the knee pads. And, at this point, we're probably sub 200 yards from his bed. But we need to we've kind of now worked to the north of him. And now we need to work back to the south and get underneath him. And so put on the knee pads and we just start doing the crawl. And probably a good 100, 125 yards, we go down the farm road and kind of dive into the switchgrass at this point. And, we are still to the west and to the north of him slightly. But at this point, we're probably only 125 yards from his bed. And that's lower woodlot that we had picked out to kind of be our benchmark to get to, is about 50 yards from us. And we kind of wanted to, we wanted to get there to see what was going on, but we didn't want to be sitting in that all day because that draw was going right up, wind thermals were going right up to him from there. So we just took our time and crawled through the grass and eventually ran into a barbed wire fence. We had to cross, 100 yards from this buck. We're slow crawling through barbed wire, and we get through, and basically we finally were hitting that exhausted point of just being beaten in the sun. I mean, this was borderline a 4-hour access. So we find a tree, we hunker down, and I had hit the point of, I don't know if it was dehydration or just heat exhaustion or what, but I had finished my water, and all I'm thinking about at this point is the cold water I left in the truck that we should have brought another one of. And, I'm trying to maintain my focus, but it was like getting bad. And quite literally, I don't know if it was dehydration or the heat exhaustion or just being freaking tired from being at this for 8 straight days of sleeping 2 to 3 hours a night. And I literally passed out. And I'm laying there sleeping on Lane's backpack, and I remember him just shaking me awake and putting the camera in my face, and I'm like, what the hell is going on here? And he's like, dude, we gotta get it together. And I'm like, yeah, this is not great. We're sleeping in some switchgrass, 100 yards below this buck. And we kind of just rallied, but it had been a good hour and a half. At this point, it's 6:30, and we're not in position. We're close, but we're not there. And so I crawl to the bottom of this bottom woodlot, and basically I'm trying to see if we can see, when he comes down this hill, if he's going to go left or right. If we sit at this bottom woodlot, are we going to be able to shoot him either way he goes? And the answer probably is yes. We probably would have saw him, but we probably would have had a 60 to 70 yard shot either way. And I'm trying to shoot my first left-handed buck, and I don't feel comfortable shooting a deer at 70 yards. And
yeah.
So that kind of made our decision. talked to Lane, and I'm like, hey, we gotta scoot up, and we gotta push to that breaking point between the two patches of timber. But the thing with that is it was going to put this bed of where we thought this buck was at like sub 50, 60 yards. And we just began crawling, and we're going up this bottom wood lot in this high, thick grass. And we get a little more than halfway, and I end up putting my knee through a stick, and pretty good snap. And, we're at that point, we're both just holding our breath. I looked at Lane, I'm like, we can't go any further. If we break another one of these, we're too close. We're pushing the bubble, and it just was that feeling of it's time to stop, and
that's a good realization, man. And as you're doing this crawling, I'll point out for the viewers, you can't see anything when you're trying not to be seen by a deer, right? So like if that thing gets up and shifts 5-10 yards, that's everything. That's a completely different perspective. The wind swirls are doing different things. Like there's a level of I wish I would have broken a branch before it was too late sometimes on these stalks, because that would have probably reminded me to just stop and wait it out for a second and reassess. But I'm glad you got to this point.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought that probably looking back was almost a sign like, hey, like stop. And, that kind of was the fear too, that if we bump him, if he does hear us, we might not ever know. We might have gone up. He might have got up and walked somewhere we couldn't have seen and gone out of our lives. And, this whole time we would have thought we just stalked a buck that wasn't there. And, we finally realized like, hey, we got our spot. But here's the situation is we were on the left side of that lower thicket, the lower patch of timber and deadfall. And we've now put all of our cards in the basket that he's going to come down that hill and take a right and walk in front of us. But if he goes left, we're up Schitt's Creek without a paddle. And the thicket to our right, there was very small windows that maybe it was possible to get a shot, but not very likely. And we felt good about the side we were on, because the does were on our side. It was also the downwind side. And, in my head, I'm thinking like maybe he's going to come down and come this way because the does are over here, or he's going to, want to be on the downwind side of this. And I don't know. We felt good about the decision, but we're also stuck with it at that point. It's now 7:00. And what was happening that night is we were getting a slight wind shift from south to southeast, which was really going to play in our favor to be on that downwind side of this thicket. And we end up hearing something, and Lane's tapping me on the shoulder, and we turn around and there's something in the thicket, and it was a coyote, and he had came out, and he's literally at 5 yards and just hopping around in this grass next to us. And Lane's filming him, and we're just watching him, and he gets as close as about 4 yards from Lane, and he finally sees him, and he just kind of skirts off. And I remember seeing that and just thinking like, how did this thing get this close? That's I don't know that they have the same nose as a deer, but they got a solid nose. He should have smelled us. And I realized quickly, like we're on the downwind side, all day long, our thermals and everything been sucking up and going to the left of this, and the wind's pushing to the left of this, and he couldn't smell us. And so it was kind of a reassurance that if he comes to that other side, maybe we were going to get a chance to make a move on him. And so we hunker back down, and we just both got the binos out, and Lane's watching right, I'm watching left. And sure enough, about 7:15, here he comes down the hill. And so Lane sees him. He's like, hey, he's coming to the right. And, I'm finally getting a really good look at his frame, and he's coming down the hill. And, we had filmed him throughout the week, come out of that bedding area with our phone scope. And in the back of my head, I thought he was a really good deer. I thought he was a really solid deer, but we both, Lane and I, first time hunting together, we're both not trying to be the guy to say, hey, he's a he's a giant when he's, we're not trying to say he's 160 when he's ends up being 140 and be that guy, but in the video, we would slow it down and I could see these tines, he'd turn his head and I'm like, man, that looks like he's got a lot of tines. But, you're not sure whether the video is just glitching from frame to frame and the tines, the same tine or whatever. And, but now we can see him, he's coming down the hill and I'm like, man, this is pretty damn good buck. And he comes right at us, closes the gap. We were probably at the closest 80 to 90 yards from his bed. And, it's a quick gap for him to close. And so he hits that break between the two patches of timber and we can't shoot that break, but it's probably 30 yards in front of us. And we lose him for a while. And we're sitting there with him for a minute. And I'm assuming he's making this decision. Am I going to go left? Am I going to go right? He's probably just scanning everything that's going on. And sure enough, he goes to his left, which is the opposite side of the timber that we're on. And, we see him start to walk that way. And there'd be glimpses of him we could get through the thicket where we'd see his body pass. And he ends up passing us and he's going downhill. And, I was kind of a little sick to my stomach, but more so I think we just kind of reacted. And the first thing we did is we just stood up and, I'd take the bow and we had talked about this. We talked it through that if this happens, we're going to try to make something happen. And so basically what I did is I just started slow walking and following him. And so as he's going down the thicket, I'm following him down the other side of the thicket and just making the assumption that he can't smell me. We're downwind. We just had a coyote come through there. I know the coyote couldn't smell us. And, if
he's monitoring what's in front of him, more so because he's coming out of bed than the safety he just came from. And
Right. And, I'm just assuming that if he can't see me or if I can't see him, he can't see me. And, I think it was a lot of what you just said, that we had pushed so far into his bubble that he was not able to wrap his brain around that there was danger in there. He's sitting up there all day long and didn't smell us, didn't hear us, nothing. And so I finally stalk around the corner and I'm waiting, holding the bow, standing there. Lane stayed where he was and he's just filming from basically behind me about 15 yards. And I'm waiting for the deer to break the corner. And I think that's when I'm going to get my shot. We watched him the night before kind of go down and do that. And, it probably would have been a 35, 40-yard shot if he breaks and goes towards the pasture. And we sit there and 5 minutes goes by of just this painstaking waiting and waiting. And I'm wondering, did he perpendicular us? Did he take a left? And is he walking away from me? We're just listening. And I look back to Lane and I can just see in his face, it looked like he had seen a ghost and he's pointing back, like up towards himself, like up here. And the buck had turned around and gone into the thicket with Lane. And so Lane is now 15 yards from this deer, standing up and, chest high switchgrass, filming this buck browsing right in front of him. And so I'm now 15 yards to the south and I need to make my way back up to Lane to be able to shoot him because he's in the thicket with us, but it's thick. Like I'm not able to just fling an arrow through there. So, I just take that same approach and just start slow stalking back up the hill. And I get to where I'm a few yards behind Lane and I can see him. And I just see his rack, do this big as he's feeding. And, at that point, I'm like, man, this is like, I just hear Lane. He's like, dude, he's a hammer. And I'm like, oh God. And my heart is just going through my chest. And I draw the bow back and I'm just walking at full draw and I'm trying to get a window. And what I'm thinking is I have to move to shoot him. But I'm also afraid that I'm moving and I'm now, 15, 16 yards from this deer that he's going to spook and the shot's going to happen quick. And I look to Lane and as I'm drawing, he goes, don't rush it. He doesn't know we're here. And Lane had been standing there with him and I had not. I had been walking back up the hill, and trying to all of my focus was on don't make noise. You know, I'm watching my footsteps and counting on Lane watching the deer. And so I let down. And at that point, he just turns, swings his head, and just stares right at both of us.
Oh, dude.
We are just frozen. And he is just looking into our soul. And I'm basically scared to death that I just blew it by letting my bow down. And sure enough, he swings his head back and he starts browsing again. And at this point, we're 15 yards, and I kind of take 2 to 3 more steps to the right and forward to just kind of clear up my window the best I could, redraw the bow, and shoot him. And, you know, at that point, I probably shot him from about 13 to 14 yards. And it was one of those pops that were just unmistakable. And, you know, I hear Lane, he's just like, dude. And you know, we're both just like, what the hell just happened? And the buck takes off and runs back up the hill, and we lose him in the thicket. And so I start sprinting up around to see if I can get around the corner to that break in the trees to watch where he's going to go. And I get there, I can see the break. He comes out of the break, turns towards me, and just collapses right in front of us.
Oh,
dies 25 yards. And, you know, at that point, you know, everything just, we lost it. And it was,
oh my God,
a phenomenal feeling. But, you know, I tackled Lane, and we're hooting and hollering, celebrating, and, you know, lost my binos and my release in the grass. And we're, you know, just an experience I'm 100% never going to forget, an adrenaline rush of a lifetime. And, you know, for him to die right in front of us was just the icing on the cake, you know. So.
Dude, that's awesome, because you can just get to celebrating right away. Like, there's no doubt, no sinking feeling. It's just pure release, man. That's incredible. I mean, that moment, unfortunately, I've had a lot of these, and they usually don't go my way, but that moment where, like, it's either a sound or a bit of movement, and then that deer locks onto you close, like, if you aren't religious, like, that moment will make you religious. Like, you're going to start praying to everything that you've ever heard of, that deer just calms down. And for you to go from basically realizing that this thing is what it is, really, it just a once in a lifetime deer, to him staring at you and then forgetting about it, and then having the wherewithal to make an adjustment to then make a shot. Like, that's a lot of changing factors, and a lot of, that's some wear and tear on your mind and heart right there, dude. Like, you got to keep composed, and it sounds like you did in the best way possible.
Yeah. I don't know necessarily why. I 100% was nervous, and 100%, you know, my heart rate was through the roof. But, you know, honestly, I think it was more the freedom of being on the ground, that my mind was at ease, knowing I was able to make a play to make it happen, versus, you know, sometimes when you're stuck in a tree, you know, you're screwed, you know, if
you're up to the fate of the deer.
Right. And, you know, that freedom of thought that, hey, like, this is a little bit in your hands to make it happen. I think that helped. And, you know, fortunately we did, and just awesome, man.
Yeah, that's incredible. There's a situation too, like, especially if you know what deer you're going after, you get to do that mental preparation on the ground. Like, you know when your final approach is, you know, where you're likely going to get your opportunities, and how valuable it is to have a cameraman in that situation rather than self-film or have a spotter during a stalk it's immeasurable, especially one in Lane. Lane is a great guy that I would take advice from on hunting, you know, 7 days out of the week. And for you guys to have like a good jive together, him being aware of your style, aware of what you guys are doing, been in those situations himself, that helps so much. So, you know, quick shout out to Lane if you guys haven't met him. Awesome dude. But I'm sure that he was a big benefit in a situation like that.
Oh, 100%. And that was the first thing I told him. I was like, Lane, I hope you feel this deer is as much your deer as it is mine, you know? And yes, I was the guy with the bow, but man, we got to hunt it together. It's a hunt we're going to have and a memory we're going to have for life. And, you know, he sent me a text when he got home. He's a dude, that wasn't my deer, but that was the best hunt of my life. And I was like, man, like, I love that we get have that memory together, but goddamn, was it cool to experience it with somebody else there too, you know, because otherwise I'd just been down there by myself, and I don't know that it would have been the same, you know, so it was awesome.
I completely agree. When I do these solo stalks in Nebraska, it's just so hard because you share all the highs and lows with yourself, and you don't have a spotter. I've been begging people to come out and spot and stalk with me, and I was like, I have this bachelor group of $8, and one of them's like 140 plus. Like, can you just I'll film you shoot them. Just please come with me. I need to share it. And they're just no. And they didn't feel confident in it. But when you finally get to share that experience with someone, it's remarkable, especially if it's a newer relationship too. It's just kind of like it's a moment that bonds you in a way that you really would never expect. And that's why I love getting people in the outdoors so much. It's a completely unique feeling. And is this your biggest buck yet?
Oh yeah. Yeah. 100%.
Probably by like 2 inches, I'd say, but dude, yeah. I mean, I know what kind of deer you're on too, so I'm sure that you're gonna get damn close, if not beat this thing pretty soon here too. Again, talk about effort and your preparation, and you certainly have both of those. So, man, I'm just so happy for you. There's so much, like, from a tactic standpoint that I would love to touch on with this, but I do have to leave for work in 10 minutes. But, dude, what an amazing story. It couldn't have happened to a more deserving guy. In Lane, you had a great guy with you, too, so it's really cool. You showed me a very small preview of the footage. The footage is ridiculous. Like, I was sitting at work yesterday watching this stuff, and I was ready to run through a wall. I was like, all right, I'm not getting any work done the rest of today. It's incredible footage. And you guys are probably going to debut this next year on the Grit series, right?
Yep. So all this will come out season 3 of the Grit 2025. So it'll be a long wait, but it'll be worth it.
Oh, for sure, man. And you can't rush something like this too. And every year I'm more and more in favor of delaying content by a year, you know, and really producing it to the quality that we would like to produce it to. And Latitude certainly produces incredible films. And I'm excited to see the justice that you guys do to this hunt through the edit. Talk a little bit about some of your new product releases with Latitude, maybe, and what you guys have going on there besides the Grit.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff going on there, and we just got caught up on all the profile platforms. So the new profile platforms for sale, and I got to use that in Nebraska a lot. Love that thing. We got the new packs. We got the Ranger 22, Ranger 11. Ranger 11 just came out. That's going to be your smaller minimalist pack. Great for a tree stand hunter. The straps tuck away. You can put it right on your stand. The 22 is, kind of your all season gear hunting pack. It's got a removable hip belt, compression panel for your outer layers, and it does have aluminum stays built into it. So kind of functions like a more firmer frame style pack, but it's it's just a saddle hunting pack that's great for holding your sticks, holding your platform. And we got 2 new saddles. We got the Maverick and the Lone Star, and Method 2 still rocking. So lineup's getting a little bigger, and trying to just offer something for everybody. So a lot going on there.
That's sweet, man. And it's tough when you're brag a little bit about Latitude in this case. I have buddies that were, obviously Cory, I know you, I know Jake really well and everything too, but you guys are a company that really supports outdoorsmen, essentially. Like, you're more trying to promote the right ethics and the right things in hunting, and be as inclusive as possible. Part of that is obviously providing gear for everyone, but at the same time, like, you weren't strapped to your gear. You weren't, it wasn't a liability for you, or like you weren't liable to have to use a saddle in this situation and have to use a certain platform or whatever. And obviously you guys have gears for every situation, but I really like that you as a company advocate for, hunt your hunt, use what you're going to use. This is some options that may help you in the process. And I think that just the best hunters adapt to the situations they're given, and they kill those deer the way that the deer are telling them they're going to get killed. And I got to commemorate you guys as a company, because you've always been about promoting people to hunt the style that works best. We're going to try to provide you the gear for each situation. But it's cool to see that you had the freedom to not be forced into a tree, because believe it or not, people, that happens quite often with companies, is you have to use their gear and you can't kill if there's a situation that doesn't allow for your gear. So, yeah, obviously check out a lot of Latitude stuff. They're at the Mobile Hunters Expos as well. You're going to get to meet Cory, D-Rock. You'll meet Alex there most likely as well. So, yeah, check that out at the next expos and stuff. And Cory, it was great to have you on, man. I really wish I didn't have to work today and we could just talk deer for the next few hours too. But man, what an amazing story, and it really could not have happened to a more deserving person.
Hey, Jacob, I really do appreciate that, and I know you've already shot some good ones, but I got a feeling your time's coming again this year, man, and I'm looking forward to that. So this was a lot of fun, and appreciate all the kind words, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Cory. Have a good one.
Absolutely, buddy. You too.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's podcast. The best way you can support the podcast is by sharing online and with your buddies at Deer Camp. Please follow us on Facebook and Instagram and leave us a 5-star review.